Thank you, Eugene. Now we're going to ask some questions. I don't know, do we have a microphone that they're all mic'd? Oh, okay, great. All right. I don't know where to begin here, but well, let's just start with Eugene. My understanding would be that drugs are banned by the NFL because they might enhance your performance, such as speed or something like that. But marijuana doesn't enhance your performance, does it? It just helps you deal with the pain like an Oxycontin or something.
Yes, I've yet to see any evidence that shows that marijuana is performance enhancing. However, the NFL has a list of banned substances and allows players to apply for therapeutic use exemptions for some drugs that are directly performance enhancing, like Adderall. And it's very contradictory when you look at that and also compare it to the marijuana policy.
Right. And as you said, opioids are freely allowed under the NFL policy.
Yes, unlike any other doctor that has the ability to prescribe you medicine, doctors in the NFL prescribe opioids because players are in a great deal of pain. And it's sad. We see players leave the game and get comfortable talking about those prescriptions and how they become addicted, how it affected their family life. It needs to stop.
Does the NFL or the players union in combination have the ability to go ahead and accept, or your proposal was to stop testing? They could just unilaterally do that?
They could simply remove testing for marijuana. There's no need for them to test for a drug that's legal. In every state, every team since 2012 that's won a Super Bowl is in a state that has marijuana legislation that allows
There's
medical
no connection,
marijuana.
though.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure everyone saw, just this last week, the AAA came out with a study that showed that there's no correlation between testing for marijuana and your ability to perform, to even drive. So the test is really just simply to say, have you done anything in the past 30 days, essentially, as opposed to are you under the influence or anything else. So the testing is really pretty sad. Dr. Sisley, is there something that we can do here in Nevada? Whoops, hit something there. That are there FDA studies, or how can we help you or other doctors who want to do research? How can the Nevada medical marijuana community?
I think the most important thing is funding. Unfortunately, scientists are driven toward studying a certain subject based on what dollars are available, and these studies are hugely expensive. I don't think people realize, like our project, we're doing a very small randomized controlled trial, 76 veterans in 2 different sites, my site in Phoenix and in Baltimore, and that project cost $2.5 million, and it's just a small study. Imagine when we get to phase 3, where we're looking at thousands of patients over 20 sites. So I just wanted to share that with you so you know what we're up against. Even a simple observational study costs at least $500,000. And so the most important thing Nevada can do is start to arrange, to allocate funds if there's a way to legislatively to manage this, to allocate a certain portion of sales tax revenue or any other tax that you're collecting off cannabis and put it into a research fund that will inspire scientists to go down this path, because as John pointed out, scientists have no incentive to even put their toe into this arena, even though they're fascinated by it, but they know that the harm it could do professionally to them, not just their image at the university, but if you're in a publish or perish system, you're never going to be able to get these studies underway in a reasonable time period. So we have to make sure the funding is available, and then of course we have to have universities that with the courage to create a sanctuary for this kind of work, and that's what we're missing so far here, is that we need universities to come. You can't just do this passively. University administrators have to step up and say, we are open for cannabis research here, and we are willing to conduct the serious, human trials on campus that will enable this kind of research to flourish. And that's what we don't have yet. So,
Now, I know Colorado, I think they have part of their tax on marijuana goes to research, and I know the University of Colorado is actually doing some research, right?
yeah, the Colorado system had about a $13 million surplus just from their medical cannabis program. And they legislatively, they passed a bill a couple of years ago that allocated $10 million of that $13 million surplus only to cannabis efficacy research. It was just a genius move because they said, look, we don't need to fund more safety studies. The federal government's already doing it. We're going to spend all 10 million in. So they plowed it into 9 different projects looking at efficacy of marijuana, everything from inflammatory bowel syndrome to epilepsy to what Eugene mentioned about using cannabis as substitution therapy for opioids, and all of that data hopefully will become available over the next few years. But Colorado made a huge investment in this. It will definitely pay. It puts Colorado at the forefront of some of the most important cannabis research in the world. And I would love to see Nevada do that next. So.
So I'll follow up that. All right, Senator Farley, would you support that proposition?
Yes, and just so everybody knows, at the end of June, we are taking a trip to Colorado. And this is one of the issues that we're going to be investigating, is looking at the tax structure and how do we appropriately fund different programs, this being one of them. So it is on our agenda, and we're actually dragging Derek Armstrong, Assemblyman, who's a tax expert, with us because he speaks tax, and so I don't. But we're really hopeful that we'll come back and you'll see something really impressive in the 2017 legislation.
One more follow-up with Dr. Sicily. When we talk to universities, I always say, well, because it's federally banned, we risk losing all our federal money if we touch marijuana. But Colorado obviously has gotten over that.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that these studies are federally regulated, so they're not, they're federally legal. Our clinical trial has FDA approval, it has a DEA Schedule I license to actually purchase cannabis from the federal government and store it on site and distribute it to patients. So the fears from the universities are completely unfounded. I mean, it doesn't make sense that they would, but they are refusing to look at the facts. The facts are there that this work is federally legal, federally regulated by IRB committees, and there's no reason for universities to turn their back on this work, except it's all about this pervasive stigma around the word cannabis, this relentless fear that people have, that it's just the words, causes university administrators to recoil immediately and run for the hills. And we need courageous administrators at the universities and at the level of the Board of Regents who are willing to come forward and say, we are going to change the tone in this state, and we are going to become a real safe and secure home for cannabis research. So.
Great. And maybe, Senator Farley, we could mandate the regents to become courageous. John, you, having seen Nevada's program and understanding the whole federal state issue, are the things that you think we need to do here in Nevada that can make it more accessible and help with the research that we're talking about?
Sure. Well, I think there's real opportunity through the use of reciprocity in this state, that being that you can bring a red card from another state into Nevada and access the medical marijuana system here. I think, I'll say, I think there are risks to that policy, for sure. And I don't know if I would necessarily have recommended it, but as Senator Farley said earlier, it's law. So you may as well, A, get it right, and then B, get out of that as much benefit as you can. And so what it provides the state of Nevada and to the dispensaries is an additional set of consumers, of patients, who have different conditions, who have different needs, and everyone's a data point. And so using that specific part of the Nevada program to build a data set, to get better understanding, to share among dispensaries, even though that might not necessarily be the best idea from a business sense. From a healthcare perspective, it's important. Share the lessons that you're learning about individuals with different types of conditions. But beyond what dispensaries can do and beyond what the legislature can do, I think Sue is right. Having leadership among academic institutions in this state is critical. Very soon there's going to be a brand new UNLV medical school. I think that's a real opportunity in a state like this to, as soon as the doors are open, like Sue said, commit to cannabis research. You don't have to approve of cannabis, but you have to at least acknowledge the fact that it exists in the state. And as you build a new med school and you're looking for funding, when you're looking for faculty, when you're looking for something that's going to put you on the map, it's hard to, first off, we all know it's hard to open a med school or to get the funding for it. But then once it's there, it's very hard to raise the profile of a med school because there are so many existing ones that are very good. One way to do that is to find a niche. And Barb Atkinson is great at finding some of the niches that specifically serve this community, like veterans' needs, like addiction services. But I think acknowledging that cannabis research is something that no medical school has committed to as an institution. And if UNLV does it, it'll be first in the nation, and it'll be in every newspaper in America if they go about it in a proactive way.
That actually is an incredible idea. And of course, the medical school, which is in my district, is literally a mile from, or less than a mile from the Ruvo Brain Center, which again was a perfect place to utilize this, so it'd be perfect. Eugene, have you ever thought about being an Oakland Raider?
You mean a Las Vegas Raider?
Las Vegas Raider. You can come here, we'll study your brain, we'll give you all you need. But Senator Farley, anything further you want to comment as far as things that we should be doing next session and going forward?
So we are working across the industry and looking at some of the issues that we're going to see going forward, not only what we've learned from having medical marijuana, but also if question 2 passes, what are the things that we need to be doing to be a state at the forefront of the industry. So the first start of that is heading to Colorado. And we do partner with John here quite a bit and check our agenda and check our research to make sure that when we are looking at legislation that we are really truly at the forefront. I continue to go out and meet with different groups. I met with folks from the highway safety yesterday and gave a panel discussion, and you would think it would be about deaths on the highway. 90% of it was on marijuana, DUI, use, where we were going in the state. So it's a subject that everybody's talking about, everybody's concerned with. So we are continuously developing a platform for legislation in 2017 that hopefully, in our perspective, as we work with some of the experts, will be a leader in the country. But with that, I also want to thank every single one of you who owns a business, who continues to support these efforts. I think some of the business owners get some flack for the industry, but these are also the same people that are helping and sponsoring and putting things like this together to educate the community. So every single one of you who not only opened up your doors and invested right after the worst economy and put people back to work with good paying jobs without a tax incentive, and continue to do so, and an intent, and also continue to help the state move forward to become a leader in the industry. Thank you very much for all that you continue to do. So a round of applause to those folks. And real quickly, Senator Sagerboom, thanks for having the courage to constantly get up and be in front of this issue, because you talked a lot about people standing up. You stood up when you were all alone, and you continue to stand up, and it's impressive, and it's an honor to work with you on this.
Well, thank you. Just as an aside, when we have one of these, everyone always prefaces what they're going to say by saying, I've never smoked marijuana, but, and I always say, well, I've smoked marijuana and I thought it was great. And in fact, there's a strain out there, I don't know if any of you have seen it, called Sagerbloom Haze. I actually haven't tried it, but I've heard it's selling like hotcakes. John, speaking of the DUI issue, have you looked at what states are doing on that and how maybe we need to look, because that's something we definitely have to address.
Yeah, so the testing, as you said, is not entirely accurate in terms of what it's trying to reflect, the underlying condition, and that is impairment. And that's a real problem. We have a really good test for alcohol. We have usually visual tests for other drugs. But with marijuana, we don't. And so if you find cannabinoid residue in the system, that typically is reflective of use in some period of time. It could be that day, it could be that week, it could be longer, depending on how that testing is done. And so what you have is a system in place where states are afraid of impaired drivers, legitimately so. What they now need is tests to measure that impairment. And one of the other problems that gets introduced is when data are then manipulated to make political points. And so what you'll hear sometimes is that there is a huge spike in fatal traffic fatalities in Colorado with people who test positive for cannabinoids. Well, that metric is used in such a political way that it's really inappropriate. What that measure tests is whether someone has used cannabis during some period of time, not whether they are impaired. Oftentimes, when data is used, either in Colorado or in other states on this point, it doesn't say whether it's the driver at fault who tests positive, but just someone who died in an accident. So it could be a passenger, and the designated driver was operating a car perfectly responsibly and without cannabis in their system. So making sure that what we're talking about when we're talking about impairment is both measured well and then presented properly is so crucial, because now everything is politicized on this point, and it makes it sound like go to Colorado and you're going to get killed by a stoned driver. It's a certainty, when the reality is that Colorado's roads are actually just as safe now as before legalization.
So all those things out there on the internet that say, oh, the DUI driving has gone up double in Colorado and Washington State, there's all these issues. There's no evidence for that, right?
So I won't say there's no evidence. There's some evidence of increases in people being caught, particularly in Washington. But at the same time, I mean, use is expanding, so this is going to be a public safety issue that needs to be addressed in the same way that there are a lot of people who are caught drunk driving, and there are efforts underway to try to mitigate that. But also, police are looking for it more now. They are, it used to be if you were drunk and stoned, then you'd blow into the breathalyzer and they'd arrest you for that, and that would be the main charge. I think when enforcement is under a more watchful eye, there's going to be more incidents discovered. And so I think that's what happens in terms of drug seizures across state borders. I think it's also happening with DUID.
Yeah, because what I understand is the total number of DUIs has not gone up. There may be more that they say was related to marijuana, but most of that is probably alcohol and marijuana related, which was already going on, and now they're just measuring for it.
Sure, I think that's right.
Dr. Sisley, is there a way to do research that's not FDA approved? Could we do, Nevada legislature could take some money and give it to dispensaries and doctors here and just do state-sponsored research?
Yeah, so you're definitely allowed to conduct observational studies on state-level cannabis. So if you want to just do an observational study, then you don't have to buy cannabis from University of Mississippi. It's only if you have a real experimental design around the cannabis that you're required to buy it through NIDA. But yeah, there's definitely opportunities for the folks here to conduct observationals where you document people's clinical response to cannabis day to day. There's a really, with this extensive software they have now, the really sophisticated seed to sale software tracking, you could do some terrific, really robust data collection, even, getting patients' impressions of the various strains that they're using. And so those things could be easily designed either with the university or without. My study, I'm proving that you don't need a university to do this work. I'm happily independent. I'm not associated with a university or a hospital. All you have to do is get IRB approval. So anytime you do studies on humans, you have to go through an institutional review board. And normally that you find those at a university or a hospital, but you don't have to. That's the beauty of the United States, is we actually have a private IRB system here. So if a dispensary, if there's a license holder here that wants to do observational studies on the patients who come in their facilities, they can apply, they can create a study design, a simple observational study, and go to the IRB, a private IRB committee, and get approved. And I would say the long-term goal, though, here for Nevada should be that any licensed grower here in this state should be applying for a DEA Schedule I license. If we're ever going to break this NIDA monopoly and force the DEA to license other growers, we need the growers in this state to push the government. The only way to do that is to put applications into the pipeline and then work with the media to pressure NIDA and the DEA to end this monopoly. And there's tons of expert growers right here in Nevada. If you guys have seen, some extraordinary, very sophisticated cultivation facilities that are going to be, within a year, are going to be able to claim that they are growing standardized cannabis, GMP grade cannabis, which is what the government requires. In order to give you a DEA license, you have to prove that you have GMP grade cannabis that is standardized. There's no reason that all of the growers in this state couldn't be up to that level soon. And so I'm hoping that we can persuade you, but this discussion today will inspire you to go back and work with your growers here to urge them to make that a long-term goal, that within the next year you open up a drug master file with the FDA and you start to prove to them that you have this GMP grade cannabis.
Yes.
If I could just add to that. One of the challenges that observational studies have, and Sue will be the first to tell you this, is that you worry about the people in your study going out and doing other things or not behaving in exactly the same way. And that's why a controlled experimental design is better. But if you sort of blend the two, there are real opportunities. What would be ideal is if you had as controlled of a setting as possible in which you can take those observations. And I think the NFL is actually a really good example of that. So if you did allow cannabis among players, your team knows what you eat, knows how long you work out every day, knows your travel schedule, knows essentially everything you do from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep, and then probably knows how long you slept too. And so what that would allow then is you could imagine the NFL saying, we're going to have a doctor monitor this, we're going to make sure that players are getting certain strains, certain cannabinoids, certain percentages, and then you can also, as a doctor overseeing what would be an NFL cannabis study, being able to say, well, this person, has a high-fat diet and a higher-fat diet than another player, and so maybe that's going to have some sort of a different effect. And you'll be able to look at how different players on different teams under different settings react the same or react differently. And there's probably no better place than a professional sports league to have that type of control for an observational study.
Wow, good idea. Eugene, we were talking before this about just the NFL's drug policy itself. Would you just explain to people just the policy itself and then what happens if somebody tests positive?
Yeah, so cannabis is banned, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, regardless if your state allows medical use. If you are screened and test positive, you're put into a program with which.
Well, first off, how often do they give you random tests just as a regular
random,
player?
It's totally random. And at any point, your total privacy is invaded. Players have spoken about the drug testers coming to their homes while they have their kid's birthday party, or at any given point of the day, and you have to let the NFL know when you travel, how long you'll be where you say you'll be. If you're not there and on time and meet the drug tester within the window, it's a failed test, whether you provided a specimen or not. And there's escalating punishment that ensues, and you see players that ultimately end up getting suspended, whether it's for a few games, and then obviously cannabis can still be in your system, so if you fail again, then the suspension increases. Ultimately, some people have been suspended for an entire year.
For using marijuana?
Yes.
Wow. And that obviously is your life and blood and a lot of other things, but that's crazy. What about between February and July?
Well, the testing is happening now.
It is?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm shocked that the union would allow that much control over you guys' lives. That's tragic.
Well, it was collectively bargained, and under the pretense that they want the players to be safe. Well, this marijuana policy is absolutely the opposite of that, and preventing players from taking cannabis as medicine is leading to an increase of opioid prescriptions, which leads to an increase in addiction, and we even see death in former players that is just so unfortunate for various reasons, and these policies need to change in a hurry.
Yeah. The hypocrisy and the craziness, here we have it in Nevada Constitution that you're allowed to use it. We have, hundreds of millions of dollars been invested in businesses where you can purchase it, and yet we have a system where you can be fired from your job, you can be denied unemployment, you can, whatever. I mean, we are so schizophrenic on it. But I think we're in the process of breaking that. But that's why it takes people like you, Eugene, to step forward and just say, the emperor has no clothes. How insane is this that how many NFL players are there? 1,000 or something? Yeah. 1,000 people have let this happen to us when we have good medication that would actually help us, and we're prohibited from that, and yet we're forced to take these drugs, which now everyone recognizes are destroying our whole country. So anyway, thank you so much for doing it again. I'm not sure what the plan was, but can we ask questions from the audience?
I have a mic.
Identify myself. My name is Skip Deering. I'm from Pahrump, Nevada.
Pahrump is what we call over the hill.
Way over the hill. I am a PTSD victim, and I'm being treated for it by a VA doctor under the table. My question is, if the government isn't listening to its citizens from polls that have been taken, that the majority of the citizens want to have medical and recreational marijuana, if they're not paying attention to them, if they're not paying attention to the ridiculous propaganda of just say no, here's your brain on butter and salt and pepper, here is your brain and reefer madness. How much influence then is big pharma, big alcohol, big prison, big tobacco is having on this issue? I have a feeling that the money involved is a lot more than just the bad influence from all of this years of propaganda.
Let me go ahead and refer that to our Republican on the panel, Senator Farley.
Well, those Democrats, no. Yeah, okay. So I just shared, I spent my first session in 2015, and what I think influences legislation a lot is those who collaborate and come up with a message and then build consensus. And so if this issue is important, the more you do as an individual to collaborate with groups and like-minded people, get a message, build consensus, and get it to your legislator, changes. So I hear a lot about money, and money does play a role, right? You get Big Pharma is organized, they're collaborative, they've got a message, and they've got consensus. And then you've got right-wing people, and you've got left-wing people that are in the same boat. And the only thing that really changes is if one person goes out and finds friends and they have a message. And, the other thing I'm going to point out is voter turnout is so low. Every vote matters. And don't ever discount that you could be the one vote that changes an election on the state and local level, and to be quite honest, at the federal level. So people, your vote is more important than money. So when you have an issue like that, do what the big money guys do. Go find friends, get a message, get some data, and start talking to your elected officials, and that you'll start to see change happen.
I'd say I tend to be a skeptic of big pharma and big alcohol really continuing being the real driving force behind prohibition. I think that marijuana prohibition in this country has been so institutionalized that big pharma and big alcohol don't have to waste their money to keep it going. I mean, it's happening without any effort on their part. And so I think in that sense, there are reasons why I think the pharmaceutical industry will want to engage on this. There's probably reasons why alcohol would be opposed to it, big alcohol would be opposed to it, considering that for a lot of people, alcohol and marijuana are substitutes and not complements. And so there's certainly the motivation for them to do that, but I think they've won the day without even throwing a pitch. And so I tend to be a skeptic about the power of big money. What I will say on your latter point, on your former point rather, about people not listening, elected officials not listening to polls. My training is in political science, and so I can speak to why this happens. There's a difference between public opinion and issue intensity. And so a lot of people want medical marijuana to be legalized, but no one really cares about it. They care about the economy, they care about terrorism, they care about Zika this week, they care about a lot of other things. But medical marijuana, unless you're a patient or a business owner, is way down on that list of what's you're really going to get motivated to vote about. You're going to throw the bums out of office if they ruin the economy or they make you risk for a terrorist attack. No one's throwing congressmen out of office because they voted no on the latest amendment to a bill that had to do with marijuana legalization. And I think that's not yet. No, that's right. And I think that's a reality, but as issue intensity increases and advocacy continues, and as Senator Farley said, people go out and recruit their friends and really become a driving advocacy force behind this, that issue intensity rises, and yeah, then people are going to start getting thrown out of office for supporting prohibition, not for supporting marijuana, which has been the policy of our Congress for 100 years.
You would think their integrity would have something to do with it.
I haven't met one who has any, so I wouldn't know. At the federal level.
Yes, thank
At the
you.
state level.
Thank you. I was about to take him outside and.
But as you know, it's going on the ballot in November. If it loses, it really will crush the whole movement. But I do feel that it's going to pass, and I think even though there's talks of lots of money being spent against it, I think in talking to people, most people realize that it's already out there. So let's go ahead and regulate it and control it and tax it, as opposed to do it underground and make it illegal and put people in prison and have crooks make money off of it. So, but it is important that we all stay focused on November, because that's going to really change things.
Stephen McCammon. I'm the co-founder of the Clinical Endocannabinoid Research Consortium out of Oakland, California. And we're starting our observational trials this summer where patients will actually, with an application after they medicate, will self-report on an app, and that will be dumped into our database, and then hopefully we'll use those proof of concept ideas to then launch into clinical trials as too high a level, but serious clinical studies with hundreds of patients. So I'd like to talk to you afterwards a little bit. But in coming up with the name Endocannabinoid Research Consortium, we had a long conversation about, do we use the word cannabis in the name or do we use marijuana in the name? And what we decided, in order to gain entree into the legitimate medical community, we had to focus on the actual physiological system in the body. And so in conversation about your medical school, if you go to a bunch of doctors that say, let's study marijuana, you're going to get a barrier just because of that. But if you say, hey, there's this endocannabinoid system that is upregulated by beta-caryophyllene, by osteopathic manipulation, by taking a walk or whatever, you're going to get a much broader acceptance rate within the medical community. So I would just like to suggest that we need to start focusing on this amazing system that has just been recently discovered that's inside the body, of which marijuana and cannabinoids are only one part of a broad spectrum of things that actually upregulate it. And so anyway, that's just my point. I'd like your observations on how we might change it in order to gain entree into the legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate medical community by using different language to talk about this. Thank you.
I would say that you mentioned a recently discovered endocannabinoid system, but I know you're aware that the system was really discovered in the 70s. Remember, Rafi Meshulam in Israel began isolating cannabinoids and really uncovering this entire endocannabinoid system in the 80s. So here we are, over 3 decades later, and we still have no mainstream medical schools that are teaching about this endocannabinoid system, about the fact that every human body has an ECS, that it's the most important physiologic mechanism in the body, and that is the biggest problem we have toward getting physicians to embrace the idea of cannabis as medicine, because if they're not exposed to this in training, they'll never believe that there's a real biologic basis to this. And so we have to make a huge push as the tax-paying public to demand that especially public medical schools start to include this material in the core curriculum, and not just, some schools are starting to add this as like a 4th-year elective, but again, not everybody's going to be exposed to it. And so there was an article published recently that they interviewed, over 200 medical schools and found that none of them had even a mention about the endocannabinoid system, and it's just such a basic physiologic training that needs to be there. So that's the first step is.
So are you saying you'll accept the position as chair of our newly endowed position of endocannabinoid professor of medicine?
I will find you some good people here.
I'll say the University of Denver Law School has the Vicente Cederberg Professor of Cannabis Law and Policy. That's an endowed chair at the UD Law School, and so.
And there's no coincidence, but I went to the University of Denver Law School.
Oh, there we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Alfonso. I am a local veteran activist. For those that have seen me recently in the news, I am that person. But my question is, now that we are doing the Melcon VA law, and now that it's passed and stuff like that, it's great. What is it going to be for us here in our VA? What is going to be the next step for us? Is the dispensary going to eventually link up with the VA, or is the VA going to try to look for nonprofits just like they always do and try to maybe help out the VA? Or what do you think the next steps now, because the budget will pass at the end of the year and will be effective at the end of the year and also the beginning of 2007? Where do you see us?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad Christine brought this up, because I think this is one of the big untold stories in these 24 medical cannabis states, is that very few veterans ever join the legal regulated system because they can't. They cannot get a VA doctor to certify them. And even the law that the proposed law that she is referencing would enable VA physicians to have open conversation with the patients in the VA about cannabis as medicine, but they are still not allowed to write certifications. So it was very misleading, unfortunately. The media coverage last week made it sound like suddenly we were gonna see VA doctors writing medical cards for vets, and that's really what needs to happen. But I'm sad to say that that's not gonna come out of this. But the reason I wanted to bring up this issue, because we've appealed to the Dispensary Association in Nevada, hoping that they would pass a bill similar to Illinois, where Illinois is the only state in the country that allows military veterans to have access to the medical cannabis program without a doctor's certification. And that is a crucial step. Yeah, it's absolutely essential. It's so important. The most veterans are not going to be able, if they have, $200, $300 to go pay an outside doctor to certify them, they're not going to be able, they're not going to spend it on that. They're going to go to the black market and buy the cannabis that they need. So we should not force veterans to go and seek out outside physicians. They should be allowed to gain access by simply submitting, legitimate medical charting that confirms they have one of the qualifying conditions. And that's exactly what Illinois does. It's a program that now, in Illinois, they've been in place 2 years. So we've already proven that this can work. All the veteran does is takes their DD-214 form that confirms their veteran status and ships it to the state health department with their medical records from a licensed physician, and they can be issued a card based on that. And I think that's a really important next step for Nevada. And we're hoping that you will see legislation in 2017, maybe Senator Farley would be willing to sponsor this, that would enable that issue to happen here.
What's going on in Congress with this reform proposal, it's really a one-way street reform. What it does is it allows patients, it allows veterans to talk to their doctors about it. It doesn't force the doctor to talk back. I mean, it reduces punishment, right? But like Stephen and Sue said, there are cultural biases within the medical community that people either don't know about the endocannabinoid system, or none of them were trained in it. And so their ability to discuss this openly is limited by their training, but they're also restricted or unwilling to discuss it because of the cultural biases that exist in the community. And so it's allowing veterans to have this conversation, but it's not really speaking to how illegitimate most of those conversations ultimately will be.
Thank you so much.
Yes, how are you? My name is Roger. I have actually a couple of issues that I'm going through now. One is we promote, but how do we protect people? I am currently, right now, suspended from my job, and I don't know what's going to happen. I turned to Senator Segerblum. I turned to another attorney, and everybody's saying it's a gray area. It's a gray area. HR is telling me it's a gray area. I have my card. I don't use it at work. I've been through the pill route. I've had 5 ankle surgeries, multiple injuries. It's not the way to go. I can't do it. It makes you do stupid things. And right now, like I said, we promote it. I'm all for it, but how do we protect people? I'm ready to lose my job. And I don't know what to do.
Yeah. So, and I just learned, and I obviously saw on the news.
And I also got a DUI with 0.00 alcohol in my system because they said I was impaired.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm falling right under this, but how do we protect people? I wanted to talk to a lawyer right away. He said, I'll be there for you. You got $1,500 for me to go sit
Yeah.
there with you? Sorry, but I don't.
Yeah. So I just met this gentleman today, but obviously saw some,
They want me to be interviewed on the
Yeah.
news. I don't want to fry myself.
Yep.
I don't want to be banned from the business. I mean, I'm a dealer, just like this gentleman's a football player.
Yeah.
When the snap of the ball goes, you got to react.
Unfortunately, you
when
might
I
have-
deal those cards, I
Yeah.
have to react. I can do my job.
yeah. So you might be one of those guys who just inadvertently got to stand up with us in the forefront of the industry.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to fight.
yeah,
I will
good for
fight
you.
this. I'm
So-
a former police officer and an EMT.
Yeah.
I know the drugs.
So I think Senator Segerblum and I probably knew that somehow, somewhere, this was going to emerge because the issue's been talked around so much about what we were going to do in the workplace. And unfortunately for you, you get to be first on this. And so, well, the first I know of, right? And the first that's kind of come forward and said, hey, we need to focus on this. And so there's some public. So for me, it's the first. We need to be, we do. And good thing is Senator Segerblum is an excellent attorney in this area, and I'm sure you have good counsel. So offline, we do need to. He is good.
Nobody wants to touch it.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to work through this issue, but there's gonna be lots of first issues, and again, this is a first for me and it's gotten some public attention as we move forward. And so I think this is gonna be one of those ones that are gonna have to develop unless you have some
Yeah,
other.
and just to expand on that as it becomes more widespread, this is an issue we can't put our heads in the sand. And just like the DUIs, my opinion is it ought to go based on some type of objective, are you under the influence, as opposed to any kind of testing or any kind of ban. And same with the NFL. I mean, if they can show that you smoked so much that you couldn't function, then that's something you should be punished for. But as far as just using it and being in your system, it's no different than anything else that we are allowed to use and be in our system. And we need to make that clear across the board. But it's going to take some time. It's just, society's evolving. But
I'm going to be the scapegoat now and lose my job and go down.
No, I think we just got to work through the issue. It's kind of hard. I think we don't know enough about what's going on. But after this, I think we need to have a conversation to look at the laws and how they're being applied and how to best help you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, I think the main thing we're all hear about is research, research, research. Well, we just know we did the seed to sale. To pass question number 2, I think it's important that maybe that we alert the public that some of these funds are going to go to do that type of research for our fellow employees in our industries, or that these dispensaries are going to do some research as Illinois did. And so if we could put that all out, because we're mandating these dispensaries to do things, but if we could use some of these, because the seed to sale is monitoring our taxpayers' dollars, why can't we as a state say part of this for you to vote for number 2 is so that we can do this to make you happy?
So we are looking at that. We're in the maybe the crawling stages of walking, of pulling all the issues together, talking to all the different organizations that are impacted. You know, it's a huge issue. And so part of the reason why we're going to go to Colorado is they're quite a bit ahead of us on some of this learning. And so my hope is that we make this trip in June. We kind of spend July, August, and September hashing through some of the policies and the nuances, and then potentially in November, before we head back to session, do another summit and talk about what the legislative platform is and what we've included and not. And again, I'm going to be really honest with you, this is brand new for me, so we're leaning on people like this gentleman and the doctor and other people to turn around and help us get that policy. But it's tax dollars, to be quite honest, and the tax dollars in under question 2 are pretty specific at how those are going to be used. But we have medical marijuana. And so to be, in all honesty, we turned to Derek Armstrong, who's an assemblyman and is also a tax attorney and a CPA, and he understands taxes, and so he's going with us to ensure that when we're talking with the Colorado Tax Department, that we understand how they did it, how they funded. He also understands our state government and our local government, so that we make sure we're funding the right things and the right programs to be effective.
We can copy all, I'm saying we need to be a trendsetter.
We are, but we have to start somewhere.
Forget Colorado.
We can't. We have to start somewhere. And so we're going to start there. And we're going to continue to pull, again, not just from Colorado, but Colorado's ahead of us. We're going to the Brookings Institute. We're talking to a bunch of different people, again, to get a platform that is leading, not following.
No, your senators are doing a really good job. It would be a very dangerous thing to ignore Colorado. Colorado and Washington have, is part of the drafting for Initiative 502 and Amendment 64 in Washington and Colorado, respectively, which legalized adult use marijuana. They built into the system these demands for data collection. And I think looking at not only what data they were collecting, but exactly how they ordered state agencies to gather that data, to come up with standards for reporting, and then to use that data, whether it is in medical testing, whether it's in public policy research. Those are great ways to just understand the administrative apparatus of that. And then, like you said, think outside the box. Think about 50 other things you can collect data on, as long as budget-wise it's doable. And yeah, let Nevada be the trendsetter, but learning best and worst practices from other states is absolutely key to getting it right.
It's all about the words. You gotta put the words in the number 2.
Good afternoon. My name is Aisha Goins. I'm from Nevada Wellness Center, and one of my owners is an ex-football player, Raider. And this question is to Mr. Monroe. So you said I was very intrigued by your delivery and just the explicit information. I just was overwhelmed. And as I said, one of my owners is Frank Hawkins, and he is an ex-Raider.
with the Super Bowl ring.
Super Bowl ring. Super Bowl ring holder.
It was Marcus
And
Allen's blocking
he,
back.
and he has experienced relief from using CBD. So my question to you is, have you reached out to pro football players and ex-players? And then also, is the NFL testing for THC, or are they testing for cannabis, period? And the reason why I ask is because CBD, we're finding in our dispensary, we're finding that the CBDs, people are using it and they're experiencing great relief and better quality of life. So my question is the NFL, is there a specific testing, or are they just testing across?
I guess I'll start here, represented also by the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition, who actually initially linked me with former players who were finding great relief, just like the owner of your company, in using cannabis, and specifically on CBD. We need research that would show that consuming CBD products would also, in the current policy state that it's in, where marijuana is a banned substance, CBD also still has trace amounts of THC, which is being screened for. So while they may have a low percentage, we don't know if it's going to trip our test and create a fail for players who decide to take CBD. It's still cannabis. It's still banned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But in response to the second question, you do have a network of ex-players who you're working with or talking to?
Absolutely. There's the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition, represented here by Mike Sindrich, who's also a lawyer in the state of California. At this point, I think there may be thousands of former players who are at the very least interested in learning more about the medical benefits of cannabis.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic to have them in a speakers network kind of thing too.
Are you the only active player, though, who's done this?
Currently, the only active player, and speaking.
That's a lonely position to be in.
I think here very soon, though, I've spoken to some players who've seen my advocacy and maybe, willing to lend their voice to a subject that's very near and dear to all of us who play the game. Our health is very important while we play now, and certainly when we leave the game.
So that's the point. You don't want to have to wait till you leave to be able to talk about it, because now's when you need it.
That's it. That's why I feel like this is such an extraordinary gift, having Eugene joining this movement, because we're all fighting against the stigma, and this is what an active player has the potential to really diminish the stigma among very resistant populations. And our football players are our national idols. We have our veterans community, our national heroes, and if we bring all of these forces together, then we'll be able to tackle what you talked about earlier, which is these super wealthy, powerful groups in this country, whether it's big pharma or private prisons that are all banning against, to try to suppress research. They don't want any objective data that might legitimize cannabis as medicine. So that's why they're fighting against cannabis research. But suddenly we have an active player who's come out publicly and not only demanded research, but put his own personal money, invested it in, very important research. And it's just an incredible gift.
It's honorable.
Yeah, it's really
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Angelella. I am a student at UNLV in my senior year for hotel management. My question is in regards to moving forward, if question 2 does pass, do you foresee the Nevada Gaming Commission opening their doors for medical or recreational use in casinos, or do you foresee cannabis as a freestanding resort entity in the future?
So I'm going to start with today, no. And the big issue in my conversations with gaming people is the money laundering concern, because it's still federally illegal. There's lots of whisper campaigns about should that change federally, what that might mean for gaming down here. But as of today, I don't see anything changing. It would have to change at the federal level first.
But that could go from Schedule 1 to 2.
Yes.
And just on this issue, I'm going to propose social clubs, which they don't have them yet in Denver, but they're looking at having them in Denver. And hopefully that legislation will raise the issue of whether the hotels want the social clubs downtown, off the strip, or tied to their nightclubs or whatever. So it's an issue that's not going to go away. And ultimately, I just think that it's a perfect thing for a casino to have a social club for cannabis as part of their overall package. So you right next to the restaurant, right next to the movie theater, right next to the entertainment, and right next to the sports book, so we can go bet on the games too.
Nevada's in a really unique position to be able to do that. Most states that have medical marijuana laws or adult use laws, or all of them with the exception of Alaska, have banned social clubs. And part of the cover for that banning is because most states now have an Indoor Clean Air Act, smoking bans. Nevada doesn't, of course, or at least in most spaces. And so they're uniquely positioned where they don't have to combat an existing state law that is wildly popular, like Indoor Clean Air Acts are. And so whether they will do it, I think, is a question, but they are uniquely positioned to do it, unlike most other states.
Sue, good to see you. And this question's for you. How do we get the doctors involved? Obviously, we can't wait till the medical school gets up and running, and we do need to put a lot of pressure on Barbara Atkinson on that. It needs to be a statewide pressure to make that happen here. We did fail with getting Sue on the faculty here. I appreciate the work you did on that, Senator Segerblum, on that. We got pretty close, though. That was good. But how do we get the doctors? How do we, is it creating continuing medical education classes? How do we bring them around? We're getting some doctors here doing it. It's actually impressive. The other issue, so there's two parts of this, and I'm over looking at my nurse friends over here, and they're getting they're getting pushback from the state nursing board on what they're doing. It's horrible. We're trying to get good medical advice here, and the state boards are pushing back. So it's a bit of a policy issue, and it's also a medical issue. So both John and Sue.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
I'll start. I mean, it's another example of this policy space being dominated by informal gag orders, whether it's an NFL player who's not supposed to talk about this openly, a doctor, a nurse, legislators. I mean, 25 years ago, you couldn't have a conversation in the State House like you can have now on this issue. And so, sadly, it's going to be a long period of time until those cultural biases are broken down. And I think as younger people who have very different views on the issue of marijuana, and especially medical marijuana, begin to dominate university medical faculties and the nursing profession and in other areas, that can change through generational replacement, but it also has to change because minds are changing. And I think the more that people look out at systems and see them working, like Nevada's medical system, like medical systems across the country, the easier it is then to push people along. But in the meantime, a lot of people are just screwed, frankly. I mean, you're never going to break down this entrenched, institutionalized, century-long cultural bias that says that marijuana is bad under every circumstance.
Also, what you mentioned about doing formal CME outreach with physician community is really important, and it could be in the form of, for example, in Arizona, we took about $300,000 of the surplus money from medical cannabis sales tax, and we plowed it into a physician education program, and it was all designed to be kind of peer-to-peer. So we had a group of physicians who became educated about cannabis and about the law especially, and we spread them across the state, going to doctors' offices at lunchtime, dinner, whatever we could to do these formal lectures. So that would be a great program, something that would be terrific to see the state health department craft something similar to what Arizona did and develop a speakers bureau of physicians who could spread across the state and do this sort of peer mentoring, because otherwise you're not gonna, the docs are so reluctant because they're afraid they're gonna jeopardize their DEA registrant status. It's not true at all, but there's this consistent fear. So that's why hearing that from a fellow doctor, if they can look at the actual law and realize that they're not harming their license or their DEA status, then we just need to get the word spread. And unfortunately, doctors listen to other doctors, so it's hard to just send out. We could get the Cannabis Nurses Association to do that, but the tough thing, doctors are pretty elitist and they only want to hear from their peers, so that's a tough thing.
But on that issue, if there are nurses who are getting heat from the nursing board, please come to me, because I'd love to at least push back on that and point out that it's in the Constitution, and I think you have a constitutional right to.
I have like a two-part question. My question is concerning the Controlled Substances Act. If we deschedulize this, it means one thing for Nevada, but if we reschedule it to Schedule 2, it means another thing. What are we doing to gear up for maybe rescheduling to Schedule 2 instead of just deschedulization?
So descheduling is not going to happen anytime soon. I can assure you of that. Rescheduling to Schedule 2 will have only the slightest of changes. It's not something that you would see day to day at a dispensary or as a patient. All it would do is change and reduce some of the bureaucratic barriers that exist to conduct research on cannabis. It will not legalize marijuana. It will not say that it is okay for the state of Nevada to sell marijuana through dispensaries. That will still be illegal federally. It will be treated exactly like cocaine, which is a Schedule 2 substance. That it exists in dispensaries in a system that is tacitly okayed by the federal government. That exists because of an entirely different administrative order from the Department of Justice, and has nothing to do with the Controlled Substances Act.
Well, on a follow-up to that question, if it goes to Schedule 2, will then it be under the purview of the Nevada State Board of Pharmacy, and will we be required to have pharmacists in our dispensaries to dispense a Class 2 controlled substance?
No, I mean, I don't think that's the case. There are a couple of states that require pharmacists on staff to dispense cannabis in medical systems. Connecticut is one of them. But I don't think the movement to Schedule 2 is going to require that, because cannabis dispensaries are still illegal federally, even under Schedule 2. And so there's not going to be a real impetus unless the federal government required it separate from rescheduling, to require that dispensaries have pharmacists on staff to dispense.
So John, your best estimate is nothing's going to happen, but even if something did happen, it'd only be from 1 to 2?
Yeah, I don't see them moving it down to 3. 3 would introduce some tax benefits for dispensaries and for grows. Well, I mean, in terms of being able to have access to traditional business write-offs, but it would also reduce bureaucratic barriers to research additionally. But it would not be legalized in the way we think of it, where the federal government would say the Nevada system is completely above board, unless it was descheduled entirely and probably introduced into a separate regulatory scheme like we have for alcohol, like we have for tobacco.
So the yes on 2 and making it recreational, the recreational, it won't have any impact on whether we need a purview, like an overview, like a board. The Nevada State Board of Medical Marijuana is the Health and Human Services oversees the whole program. But then when question 2, if it passes, are they additionally going to oversee the program?
Do you want to take that?
I think,
Go ahead.
I would say, the initiative itself says it moves under the Department of Taxation.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, there is no, I haven't seen any of that or any.
Yeah.
So would it be safe to say that it'd be better to to
I
make
think-
it recreational and then do the movement from within, now that we have that, and let the options, be available?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like example, if question 2 does pass, because if it doesn't pass, then Arizona has the same ballot and so does California. So then if they go recreational and we don't, then our medical stuff will also fold too. But question is, if we promote question 2 and get that voted, then that would allow not only the veterans to consume, but it would also allow the veterans that are still veterans, but are not allowed to use the VA system, right?
would that still be an option for anybody, or even the community to kind of just see as a benefit if we make that recreational, and then we can tackle it from within the state?
Well, I think any veteran who is struggling with access to marijuana because of the structures that exist within VA would find better access to legal marijuana under a recreational system. They could access the product. They wouldn't have to talk to their doctors about it. I will say, and I assume Sue would agree, if you are using it for medical purposes, it's probably better to have a conversation with at least someone who has a background in it, whether it's a dispensary owner, whether it's a doctor off the record, however it is, because the use of it for medical value is very different than just wanting to go get high. And so I think you might have access under the new system, but there are still reasons why the medical system still has benefits for veterans or anyone.
Can it be safe to say that?
I need her to go and then we gotta wrap up.
Go ahead, sorry. I'll talk to you. I'm so sorry. I get into it, I'm sorry, I get into it.
Hi, my name's Rhonda, and full disclosure, I'm a client at the Grove, which happens to be one of the best dispensaries I've tried so far. That's true. There was a gentleman who talked about using the term marijuana and the legitimacy of it. And back in 2010, I opened an advocacy group just across the street called HEMP, Helping Empower Medical Marijuana Providers, trying to set a standard as we started addressing the issue here in Nevada. When I started working with Assemblyman Aisley and Senator Seger-Blum on a bill that I authored in 2011, AB 235, that's when I realized that the legal aspects of it was the law and the Constitution here used medical marijuana in its terminology. So that's where I continued to use the word marijuana as opposed to cannabis. A question that I have is, I understand everyone legislatively is working, individual groups are working, and those types of things, but is there any groups or teams that are working on approaching philanthropists that might want to put money in? I know that, not to mention Trump, but $2 million to $10 million in research money is not even a yacht to him. So is there any teams that are working together for some real money?
Well, there used to be a lot of rich people in Nevada, but they invested in all the dispensaries.
Which is exactly my point. That's actually my point, which is there's money going for self-interest, which is fully fine. This America business is fine. But are there groups looking to philanthropists who want to put their own money in?
Do you know, Sue, for medical research?
I can tell you, I mean, I'm not sure about Nevada, but I can tell you that's our best hope for funding cannabis research is finding those devoted donors. We had an incredible gift in Australia. You saw a private family donated $33 million to the University of Sydney and catapulted them right to the forefront of the biggest medical, marijuana research in the world. And even that, though, just so you know how serious the money, how desperately and how expensive it is, the University of Sydney took that as seed money to leverage, basically matching funds of another, their goal is to raise another 100 million because they feel that's what they need to. So it's important to realize that, we need to be, going to every corner of the state to try to uncover these donors that care about this work. The family in Sydney, for instance, had a granddaughter with epilepsy. So of course they had a connection with, they wanted them to focus on that, but they didn't limit them to that. And so, we just gotta find these folks.
In terms of funding policy research, I can speak to that, not from the medical side. It is very difficult to get philanthropic organizations to be okay with it. Again, it's this battle against gag orders. We have had success with some organizations, some that would surprise you, I think, but it's a very difficult uphill battle still because it's an evil product that no one wants to have their hands dirtied with, so.
One last quick comment.
But I'm sorry, just on that final issue, from my perspective, recreational could produce at least $100 million in taxes. And if you took 10 million of that over 10 years, that could be the basis for what you're talking about. So I think we shouldn't overlook the tax revenue as a source.
Good afternoon. My name is Mona Lisa Samuelson, and I'm a community advocate and community activist. And I want to thank you so much for throwing this event. This was free to the public. This included all the patients. This was about our issues, and we all came together to figure out how to progress. And we had the best leadership here on our panel, and I just want to put our support behind this and say thank you all for coming. And it's great to see people interested about the right things. Thank you.